This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And hotter than the Baseline NBA podcast clearly has to be that team that loves the sport, the gang green. So you know that our topic of conversation has to be about them Boston Celtics. That's why we watch the NBA. That's why we're enamored with the brand. And that's why you got the two biggest, baddest brothers on the planet discussing the NBA as we see fit. So let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado. www.shawsports.net is where he resides and shows pride from. Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Tell me something. Do you know who might actually be more of a cheerleader about this current streak that the Boston Celtics are on right now, man?
No, man, you have to let me in. Who could be more of a cheerleader than the Boston Celtics right now? Tell me who that might be.
Oh, my God. Bruce Banner's alter ego, man. The Hulk, right? I mean, not only is he cashing in on Ragnarok, but he is watching the Boston Celtics as we speak go gangrene on the rest of the NBA, brother.
That's cool. Well, they are Hulk smashing the rest of this league right now as we recorded this show, 15 straight, and we have a great guest that's going to be joining us for the breakdown as always. But salute to all the fans, listeners of NBA Baseline. You know, it's going to be an amazing show. Got a great topic, obviously, with the breakdown of the Celtics, but then an even much more fun topic where I think I'm going to be pulling out what hair I don't have, trying to discuss who you got, man. So I think it's going to be a great show.
We'll save what few strands you have left by the time that we get to our subject of the drop. Of course, we're talking about our segment of who you got, man. We haven't done this. This is going to be the first one for this coming season, but we got two names that we're just like, oh my God, they're so lucky that they're on the same team. But if we had to separate them, if we have to separate the baby from the bathwater, who are you taking? Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid? So get ready for a great topic of conversation on our segment of the drop with our segment, who you got, Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid. Of course, the breakdown, we got our man, John Corrales from Reds Army. He's going to help us break down this impressive win streak that the Boston Celtics have shown us. And it's like we're not even a quarter way into the season, and the Boston Celtics have already exceeded expectations given how the season had already started. So much to get into. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for tuning into the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, Google Music, Roku channel, iHeartRadio. The Baseline NBA podcast via through Almighty Ballers Radio. If you want to get the goods on the NBA 24/7, look no further than Almighty Ballers Radio. Tune in, lock on, and you'll catch the Baseline NBA podcast. We're also featured on 16 Wins a Ring, so be sure to go to the 16 Wins a Ring website, download the greatest content that discusses the NBA, but the Baseline NBA podcast is also featured there, and we're also featured exclusively on Dash Radio. Nothing but net is how they call it. That's how we ball with them, so be sure to check out Dash Radio. So any of these platforms allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week, joining us to talk about the hottest basketball team in the NBA. He has been covering the Boston Celtics like no other. He is one of the hosts for one of the premier podcasts, Locked on Celtics. He's our man, and he's also the co-founder for RedsArmy.com. John Corrales. John, thank you for hopping on board with us to talk about those B-boys holding it down up there in Boston.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. It's crazy. Just to hear you introduce the team at 15 straight wins, it's just unreal that that's actually happening right now.
The first thing that I want to put on the table here to get your perspective from, John, is this. You know, everybody, I'm sure, has been scratching their heads about what Danny Ainge has been plotting over the last few years. And then we kind of saw, the writing on the wall. We saw the blueprint. given what the Celtics did last year, getting to the Eastern Conference Finals, maybe to some people's perception, it was overachievement, whatever. Then we saw what Danny Ainge did in this offseason. And even going into this situation, minus what happened to Gordon Hayward, I was still very skeptical about how good this basketball team would actually be, given so much of the turnover, given the fact that, 4 of your starting 5 of roster last year is not on the roster for this year. And there's an expectation that these guys are supposed to go deep to the playoffs. When you first saw this team constructed, what was your perspective from this? How did you truly feel about, how confident did you feel about this Boston Celtics team going into the start of this regular season?
Well, with a healthy Gordon Hayward, I felt confident that they were going to kind of duplicate what they did last season. Challenge for the top seed in the East. The thought I was thinking was Cleveland's going to coast and they're going to have their problems, which they're doing, and the Celtics are going to kind of battle it out with the rest of the sort of good teams in the East, and we'd probably rematch with the Cavs in the finals. After the injury, I was just sitting there thinking like, all right, let's see if we can hold on and maybe get home court, and let's hope we can get home court in the first round of the playoffs. I still thought they were good, and I still thought they were a lot better than most teams in the East. But of course, when you lose your big free agent signing, look, before Kyrie happened, their big target was Gordon Hayward. Hayward was the guy. He was finally going to be their primary scorer, the guy who could create, the guy who could do a lot of different things. And we were planning for a season with him and Isaiah and trying to figure out how everybody kind of worked together. To lose that guy and then look at your team and say, geez, so many young guys, so many rookies, how's this all going to work? I thought after the injury that they would come down pretty hard, and they'd probably fight to maybe win 50 games. So this has all been a real pleasant surprise.
When you say a pleasant surprise, I listen to the Locked On Celtics podcast pretty consistently, and you guys do a great job, you and Jay, and wanted to just kind of double take here, if you will, because I listen to the show, but I want our listeners to be able to hear your perspective as well. Talking about Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, are you just blown off your feet of how well two guys have progressed and matriculated thus far in this season?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with the rookie. Let's start with Jason Tatum, who look, the Celtics made a big bet here that they traded 2 Brooklyn picks this summer, basically. In that big trade with Pierce and Garnett, they got 3 Brooklyn picks, 2 unprotected picks in a pick swap. So they made 1 pick, which was Jaylen. They traded one of the others in that Markelle Fultz swap and got Tatum, and they trade the 3rd to get Kyrie Irving. So Danny Ainge made a huge bet because he traded away the prize pieces of that Pierce and Garnett trade. And when you look at the trade that got them Tatum versus Fultz, I mean, Fultz was the consensus guy. Everybody was saying it's Markelle Fultz. Most GMs, you go and you take the consensus guy. It's a safe pick. You save your job that way. But Danny Ainge doesn't care about his job. Like he's set for life. There's no fear for his job in Boston.
That's been evident for so many years.
Yeah, but you guys know how it goes. So many GMs are kind of like on the hot seat. They're kind of not building a team to build a team. They're building a team to make their owner happy. And what ends up happening is you make a bunch of kind of less than stellar decisions. You do make the consensus pick, and you kind of middling around the NBA for a long time. So Ainge said, here's a guy in Tatum that fits our plan. Fultz doesn't fit our plan. And as good as Fultz may be, he may be great someday. I don't know. I'm not gonna crush the kid for having an injury and whatever. But he saw Tatum. He made the trade, get another asset. Maybe the Lakers pick could be the Kings pick. We'll see what conveys. But he saw in Tatum the 6'7" type of wing who is capable of switching on the defensive end, who's capable of getting himself into spots on the floor where he can score with an NBA game, an NBA offensive game, ready to go in there and not dominate by sheer athleticism, but to score based on a very innate ability to put the ball on the floor and go score the basket. That's the thing with Tatum that's different than a lot of other rookies. Rookies who usually dominate are athletic freaks and go out there and display their freakish athleticism and do freakishly athletic things. But Tatum is not doing that all the time. He's exploiting defenses. He's finding lanes to the basket. He's spotting up and executing as part of an overall offense. So I'm very impressed with his maturity on the offensive end, first of all, and then I'm extremely impressed by his defensive ability. He's a big contributor to the Celtics defense, and I didn't think that he would be that good defensively right away. And then Jaylen Brown, I'm actually, as we record this, I just wrapped up a piece on that I'm going to publish on Boston.com tomorrow on Jaylen Brown's defense. His defense is phenomenal. And when this team was constructed, everybody was thinking, well, you lost Avery Bradley, you lost Jay Crowder. That's two of your three best defenders. There's no way the Celtics defense is going to make up for that kind of loss. But here's a guy in Jaylen Brown, another guy who's 6'7", 6'8", who can go out and start as the backcourt mate for Kyrie Irving and check the other guys, the other team's two guard. And then through a series of switches, end up on a power forward, and then through a series of switches, end up on a point guard and be fine throughout the whole thing. And that type of defensive ability is part of what makes the Celtics defense so great. You look at that 15-game win streak, they're out there stopping teams. They get down 15, 16, 17 points consistently in this stretch. Consistently. And yet they stop teams from scoring 100. Last night in Atlanta, they gave up 35 points in the first quarter. They still held Atlanta to under 100 points, which is crazy. They clamped down on that defense, and it's guys like Brown and Tatum who are part of a very switchy kind of defense. You throw in Morris, you throw in Horford, Kyrie's trying on defense. I mean, those guys are all playing very, very well together. It starts with those wings that Danny Ainge brought in, and all of a sudden you see the type of team that Ainge has been talking about and that Brad Stevens has been talking about for so long. Positionless basketball, ball handlers, wings, bigs. No 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ball handlers, wings, bigs. And the wings are all switching all over the place. The big is down there protecting the basket, but he's still mobile in Al Horford, who can switch out when he needs to. Kyrie is putting forth an effort. He can switch and do a good enough job for long enough where it doesn't hurt the team. So the whole thing is coming together. But back to the original point, the fact that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, a rookie and a second-year guy, 19 years old and 21 years old, can go out there and produce the way they have produced already is amazing, because they're just getting started. And you think about all of the mistakes that they make, all of the things that they'll just clear up by sheer experience, that where they are now is only a fraction of what they're going to be doing. And that's really exciting.
John Corrales here on the Baseline NBA podcast. In our segment of the breakdown, we're discussing the Boston Celtics, 15 straight wins, and probably one of the most impressive streaks that is taking place that we've seen over the last few years. And, you know, John, we talk about these streaks at times. I go back to when the Golden State Warriors found their switch, when they turned it on. And, you know, people can look at the 73 win season. I'm going to go back to when they first won the NBA championship. There were a series of streaks that were happening when the Golden State Warriors won 67 games that year. And I was more confident about them winning an NBA championship more so than I was about most other teams. Even when you had LeBron James, you know, dominating the league, I felt like what I'm seeing here from this Boston Celtics team with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, to your point, is very much the evolution process that I saw from the Golden State Warriors defensively with Klay Thompson and Draymond Green both together. Is it a foregone conclusion that we can have those same type of expectations for this basketball team, given what they've shown us in this 15-game win streak, because it's about their defense, and we don't worry so much about the fact that offensively they still have some ways to go to get it together?
Well, I'm certainly not going to go that far. I'm enjoying the hell out of 15 straight wins, but as Brad Stevens said before the game last night, they aren't playing well enough for long enough to really, as he put it, make this valid for as a win streak. Like, they're figuring out a way to win 15 straight regular season games in November. Like, that's great. 15-game win streaks don't happen when you're bad. You know what I mean? Like, that's the obvious thing.
Right.
You got to be good to win 15 straight games, but they are making a lot of mistakes, and they are getting, I think, when you win 15 straight games, especially with the comebacks that they've had, there has to be some participation from the other team. There has to be some stretch of luck involved. So you go back to the beginning of the streak. You play Philly, you play Milwaukee, you get a revenge game against the Bucks. I'm sorry, you play Philly and New York, two bad teams, and at that point, Philly had not figured anything out. You play Miami, which was a tough game. You catch the Spurs without Kawhi. You get the Kings, who are terrible, the Thunder, who are struggling, the Magic. You bring them back down to earth. Atlanta twice. And both games were kind of tough for a stretch, but Atlanta's not good enough to really hold off a good team. The Lakers aren't great. The Hornets screwed up, and really that was a great example of the defense clamping down. But the Hornets also just fell apart. And I'm not a Dwight Howard guy, so there was too much Dwight Howard in that game. But then they beat the Raptors, and the Raptors had opportunities to win that game. And they didn't. So they kind of lucked out there. They beat the Nets, who are not good. And then the Warriors, they came back against the Warriors, which was an amazing win, hell of a comeback. But look at all those games I rattled off. So many of those games are winnable games when you look at the schedule. That they should have won a lot of those games. And that's easy for me to say looking back at and thinking how good they are now. But a couple of wrong things, and this whole thing, the conversation's different. So I don't want to get wrapped up in 15-game win streak here now and say this is going to mean a finals contender. I still don't want to put that there.
That was kind of where I was wondering. Like, look, I'm very impressed with this streak, but I'm also tempering my expectations because of the deficiencies that I do see from this basketball team. And in most cases, if you see it through the course of an NBA season, you can gradually say, okay, this is not indicative of who they are. They probably won't collapse in this kind of way because you already see the writing on the wall, how great they could possibly be. But I also attribute to your point, there's some young guys on this team that have not played together. You got a guy that they're taking a chance with in Kyrie Irving while he is an NBA champion. What are his motivations? Is he going to be like the true leader that the Celtics team is going to need now that Gordon Hayward is not there, right? So there's so many components to this, and this early 15-win streak, while it has some ramifications of history to it, it is kind of like, hey, don't get all caught up in the pie in the sky, because of it, not just because of the teams, but also because of what you glaringly see is any hit or miss situation. And we won't be talking about a 15-win streak, maybe a couple of 3, 4, 5 here and there, but definitely some L's that the Boston Celtics would have taken through the course of this streak.
Yeah, I don't want to get too caught up in this streak. It means blah, 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 and you're starting to extrapolate things out. It's been 17 games, and a lot of these rookies haven't played the type of schedule. Like they're only just experiencing this type of schedule. Like, they're playing every other day up through basically January. At some point, they're going to break down. I think at some point these guys are going to get tired and they're rookie walls. Now, The plus side to that is, look, their schedule is kind of crazy because they're playing in London in January. So their schedule is very front loaded. They play every other day plus a couple of back-to-backs, and there's no time to practice, there's no time for anything. That could be good because that just gives you time to keep this momentum. You don't have to like a lot of downtime to sit there and bask in the glory. You're traveling to the next city, you're going to the next thing, and you're in this groove that you just go out there and you say, okay, you start slow. All right, let's get back into our groove and do it. Like that, I think is beneficial. But on the back end of that, there's going to be fatigue that is unavoidable no matter what they do. They, a lot of these young guys, I think, are going to end up getting fatigued. They're not used to this kind of schedule. So I do think there's going to be some sort of letdown. Now, the good thing about this is they've piled up 15 wins. At 15-2, they've got a lot of their winning out of the way early. So they can go 500 the rest of the way and win 32 more games, and that's a 47-win team. So that's you've already done like most of your heavy lifting already. That's great. Now, they won't go 500 the rest of the way. They'll be better than that. So they've already put themselves in a good position for when the inevitable letdown happens. I just want to enjoy the results, but also you have to understand that the Celtics offense has not been great. They are at the bottom third of the league offensively. They got that best defense, but playoff wise, if they don't improve, let's just assume that this is the team. If they don't improve, the playoffs are a different story where the other team is going to play a much better brand of defense. And if this offense is still going to be 22nd in the NBA, your defense can be awesome, but you still got to score. And I just think there's still some trepidation on my part is if they can't fix this offense, if they can't get the flow and the passing, they're down to the bottom half of the league in passing, which they were at the top, I think top 5 last year. So there's a lot that they need to still work on. And just hopefully that through the coaching and through just some more continuity, they can fix that. Well, another thing to consider is Kyrie has missed time with injury. Horford missed time with a concussion. Obviously, Hayward's out. Tatum had an ankle thing. Jaylen Brown's playing through the death of his best friend. There's a lot. Marcus Morris missed half of the games already because of his trial. There's a lot of there's still a lot of continuity for them to learn because they haven't played a lot together, which is still crazy because after winning 15 straight games, for me to say all that stuff and say there's a lot for them to improve, it's nuts, but they do. They have a lot to improve.
Well, I think you're definitely, you're not Charles Barkley in this at all, where you're calling them overrated and they have no chance, and you're just trying to keep some sort of level-headedness to this. But there was a point that I heard on, I think on Sirius XM the other day too, whereas because it's the Boston Celtics, right? And because there's so much history associated with this franchise, not necessarily this team in this iteration of it, but this franchise in general, this is a team that I think a lot of people would be getting behind in a lot of ways. And that's what they said on Sirius XM. And I was like, that's a great point. If this was, I don't know, whatever, last year, the young Timberwolves, or kind of even what you've seen going on with Philadelphia right now, it would be like, that's so great that this is getting behind them. But I think because it's the Celtics, there's a lot of trepidation and a lot of concern about it, or again, the word overrated being used as they were said last year too. They're the worst number 1 seed in the history of the NBA. All of those things. Do you agree with that kind of assessment? Whereas because it's the Celtics, there's a lot more, for lack of a better phrase, maybe hate, despite the fact that they won 50 straight games.
Well, yeah. Look, there's a lot of things you can say to cut down what they're doing. I think one kind of coded way that people do that is by just giving all the credit to the coach and saying, like, Brad Stevens is a wizard and he does amazing things, but for 15 straight games, it's not all coaches. It's not all coaching. It's some players got to go out there and execute too. I think there are people who want to hate on the Boston Celtics. They want to discredit everything that they're doing, and they'll take the things that I said. Like if somebody wanted to take this podcast and say, "Hey, look, even John Corrales says that they beat up on a bunch of bad teams." Like, all right, fine, but the point is that there's a combination of things. Like nobody plays the Warriors for 15 straight games. you got to beat the bad teams too. So yeah, there's some hate. I think there are so many things that are going on here that I guess take away from the streak that you can say, well, they're doing it in spite of blah blah blah. Like they're doing it in spite, like the Cavaliers are terrible, and everybody's like maybe putting, I don't know, emphasis on how bad certain teams are, and look. I don't know what it is with the hate. You can spin it any way you want. People can go out there and spin this thing as the Celtics are absolutely going to the finals because look at, you don't win 15 straight games and not go to the finals. Or you can say they beat up on a bunch of cupcakes and they caught a few good breaks, and they'll come crashing down to earth and people are going to point and laugh. I don't know. I guess I can't speak to that very well because that's just a personal thing, a personal choice that people want to make. If you have it in your head that the Celtics shouldn't be doing this, then you're going to find ways to discredit it. That's the bottom line. If you thought all along that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, then you're just looking for any little thing that supports that bias that you had coming in, instead of just looking at it for what it is. Like, they've managed to win 15 games. They all happen to be in a row, and some of it's been luck, some of it's been good timing, some of it's just been goddamn great defense that is hard work and the product from the top down, good construction from the GM, good coaching, and good execution from the players.
John Corrales joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to catch his Twitter handle at RedsArmy_John, hosts the Locked On Celtics podcast. And listen, my man talking it. Yeah, you want to know what we know about the Boston Celtics, this is one of our primary sources that we like to go to and get an earful about why we're even talking about the Boston Celtics being among the best right now in the Eastern Conference. John, I want to follow up on something because you mentioned a little bit about, what we talked about earlier with regards to Danny Ainge and the job that he's done constructing this basketball team. And I want to talk about it just within the context of this win streak itself. If you are a GM right now in the Eastern Conference, Toronto Raptors, Washington Wizards, these are teams that are always in the conversation when we talk about Eastern Conference playoff basketball. And yet we talk about this Boston Celtics team and the way that they are constructed. And to the point of what we've all been saying is while we're enamored with this 15-game win streak, there's still a lot that has to be done for the Celtics team to give credibility and credence of us talking about we should expect to see them playing in the Eastern Conference Finals against a loaded Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team. What is it that you want to see take place over the next week or so to ease your mind about where the Celtics find that offensive groove? I think too much is put on the fact that it has to come from a free scorer like Kyrie Irving, or maybe because Jason Tatum coming in from the draft was the most offensively gifted basketball player, as a lottery pick. But what is it that you want to see over the course of this next week or so that's giving you credence to the fact that this is where I see Brad Stevens putting his imprint on the improvement of this offense, and particularly where it touches certain basketball players? Because I can't expect Jaylen Brown to be your second best scorer on this basketball team through the course of this year. I think he's capable of it. But if we're talking about guys like Tatum, guys like Marcus, guys like Horford, like, where is it going to come from for us to really, really buy into how seriously dangerous this basketball team is?
Well, it's not so much who it comes from, it's just how it's done. Offensively, I want to see these guys pass the ball more, pass and move and run a free-flowing motion, read and react offense. In the preseason, and now granted the preseason had two factors. One, they played the Sixers and the Hornets twice, and those teams have shown to be not only not great, at least the Sixers back at that point weren't great. They're also, it's preseason basketball, but also the Celtics had Gordon Hayward, so there are differences there. But in the preseason, we saw some real good read and react offense where the team would run a set, and the sets aren't necessarily overly complicated. I mean, it's not anything innovative. It's not like Tex Winters out there drawing up an entirely new triangle type offense. They're running sets that teams have seen before, but they ran those sets to a point where there was crisp movement, there was ball movement, their players were making the right read, they were making the right play, and they were scoring, and it was just kind of shared amongst everybody. Now, you look at the scoring right now, Kyrie's averaging about 21. Brown, Horford, Tatum are all somewhere in that 15, 14, 13 point a game mix. Morris has started to chip in with about 13 a game. That's great. I just want everybody to kind of share the ball. And beyond that, I want the bench to come in and to kind of do the same things. I want to see just good flowing offense. And you might argue that they're expending a lot of energy on defense, doing a lot defensively, and that inherently takes away from your offensive movement. But I think you can do both, and I just want to see more of the passing motion offense. They're just not passing the way that they have in the past.
So my final question, really, regarding this team is something that's been, an Achilles heel for this roster for seems years, especially in the Brad Stevens era, if you will. They're still not a good shot blocking team, but they've traditionally been atrocious rebounding the basketball. This year, they're one of the top rebounding team in the NBA, and they don't really seem to have a whole lot of size to kind of get that done. Can you explain to us a little bit how they're rebounding the basketball at such an efficient rate? And then another thing too is, I know they have that disabled players exception. Do you expect them to use that maybe on a big or something like that to continue to maybe get some rim protection as well?
Well, let's start with the disabled player thing. I don't think they're going to use it. I don't even know if they're going to use it at all this season. They At this point, I don't know, unless they think at some point in the spring that they really have a legitimate shot at going to the finals, and and at that point, then yeah, they might try to add some help. I don't think that a big is necessarily going to be the help that they're looking for. I would rather see shooting off the bench because they still need some floor spacing off the bench. So I don't think it's a big at all that they would need. But I would I would keep playing the guys that they have. More Shemi Ojale, more Daniel Tice. Get those guys some minutes if they really want to try to develop those guys. And those guys were pretty good. Ojale was a pretty good pick in the second round. Tice coming over from Europe is a nice addition. So give them some more minutes rather than bringing somebody else in. Again, unless they think they're going to go to the finals and this is a chance to strike, and then they can bring in whomever ends up getting bought out to boost their bench a little bit. To the rebounding, a couple things with the rebounding. First of all, they're bigger across the perimeter. So instead of Avery Bradley, who's 6'2", and Isaiah Thomas, who's obviously 5'8", they're now throwing Kyrie Irving, who's 6'3", and Jaylen Brown, who's 6'7", and Jason Tatum, who's 6'7" or 6'8". And those guys end up rebounding better than the guys that they had last year. I mean, Brown's getting 6.5 rebounds a game. Tatum's getting 5.5 rebounds a game. You're getting rebounds across the board from guys, positions that they didn't get the rebounds from last year. Those guys are also able, because they're long and athletic, they're able to keep rebounds alive. So guys that like the smaller guys they had last year, maybe the less athletic guys they had last year, weren't able to tip rebounds. These guys are getting their hands on balls and tipping them up, and the rebounds end up going to Horford or Baines, but those guys are keeping plays alive. And finally, with the rebounding, that's different this year than last year. It starts with defense. That defense last year wasn't very good, and they were allowing a lot of people to get deep into the paint. And even if that was a drive and kick, there was a guy in the paint, and there was a guy. The team was in rotation, and when your team is in rotation, you're not sitting around trying to box anybody out. You're kind of confused. You're scrambling. That allows for guys to swoop in. So you got smaller perimeter guys in rotation. That just is a recipe for disaster. This team, because they switch so often, they keep guys out on the perimeter. They're not allowing as many drives. They're forcing more jump shots. And when teams have all of their offensive players outside of the paint, those guys aren't trying to all crash the boards. So the Celtics are getting a lot of rebounds. A lot of those rebounds are just uncontested because the other team hasn't been able to penetrate. They've been probing but haven't been able to get anything. Everybody's 10, 15 feet away from the basket. That jump shot goes up. They just turn and go back and say, screw it, let's go play defense. So it's a combination of things. It's not just size and a big guy who can go up and grab rebounds. The defensive scheme, the taller guys, the ability, the work ethic, all of that stuff all comes into play, and it all results in better rebounding.
Final question for you, John. Boston Celtics at 15 straight. Where do you think the streak ends?
Well, I've been looking.
Not that I'm trying to. I'm not that I'm trying to have you throw a voodoo curse on them or nothing. But if you're looking at,
I've been looking for trap games all over the place here. Like none of this makes sense. Like the fact that they keep winning these games.
Sounds like you've been in. It sounds like you saying you looking for them trap games. Sounds like you've been in Atlanta far too long so far in the last week or so, man. Don't get hung up with T.I. now too much. Now let's go.
Look, after they beat the Raptors, I thought, okay, you beat Toronto on a missed buzzer beater, all right? Toronto had a chance to win the game. You won. Emotional win. Then you go on the road to Brooklyn before you face the Warriors. I thought that Nets game has trap game written all over it. And now, they didn't play great, but they won that game. And then after the Warriors game, I thought, look, they beat the Warriors. They're going on the road for a road trip. This is Thursday night at home. You go out, you celebrate. Like that first game on the road, definite trap game. And they went out and they got down 15 early, but they came back and beat Atlanta. So they could go out and lose against the Mavericks. They could say these guys have what, 3 wins? Is that what the Mavericks are at? 3? Yeah, 3 wins. So they sit there and be like, now we've got our streak. Everybody believes in us. They can get a little cocky and they go out there and lose to the Mavericks. It's possible. So my point is, I have no idea where this streak's going to end. They could win 5 more games. They could lose this next game. I have no clue. In all actuality, they should beat the Mavericks. They could beat the Heat. I think that first game home from a road trip, Orlando on a Friday night, could be problematic. Or the back-to-back at Indiana. Indiana has been playing fairly well. They are dangerous, more dangerous than I thought they would be. So, man, I got no answer for you, man. None of this makes sense. All of these games are like, I could see it going either way.
Man.
Write it out one game at a time, man. I'm going to be like Brad Stevens. Not too high, not too low.
It just sounds like we're just going to have to bring you back on here, JK. You know what I'm saying? We're going to have to bring you back on here so you know what I'm saying, you can give us a more definitive answer. You know what I'm saying? Who knows, man? Celtics might just keep streaking until you come up with a team. That might have to be the voodoo curse, man. That's how it's going to have to play itself out.
If that's what we got to do, then that's what we got to do. I'll be happy to play my part.
Definitely. He is the man. He represents Locked On Celtics, RedsArmy.com. Our man, John Corrales. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at RedsArmy_John. John, thank you so much for helping us break down what is already an impressive win streak with the Boston Celtics. And we're definitely going to get our listeners to keep you on lock, man. They want to hear more Celtics talk, brother.
I appreciate that very much. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right.
Still aftermath, and ain't nothing after that.
Time to go Aftermath. Cal Lee Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And what an energetic interview with our man, John Corrales, Reds Army, Locked On Celtics, Shaw. Just absolutely profound. And you know what's so impressive about how John broke everything? I mean, he basically literally went through each and every single team in this 15-game win streak. And while a lot of people will be fixated on the fact to say, well, it doesn't sound like this was a really strong strength of scheduling. Listen, you play against the teams that are in front of you. And what he's basically emphasizing is, while you've got too many of the fandoms out there already trying to book a ticket for the Celtics to get into the Eastern Conference Finals and the NBA Finals, You know what I'm saying? A lot of people shouldn't be snoozing on the fact that this strength of schedule in this 15-game win streak should be just pressed upon the idea that the Boston Celtics are getting over lucky as well, too.
Yeah, there's just a middle ground, when it comes to this team, if you will. And I think what's atypical of their streak is that I don't have it in front of me, but what their win margin is. But typically, a team goes on this type of streak and they have a lot of blowouts kind of mixed in because they're just kind of riding a hot wave. This is a team that's been grinding it out. As he alluded to, the defense is really the king for the Boston Celtics, and offense has really become secondary, which I think the sum of the parts, we're looking at it going into the regular season, like, wow, they really are going to take a step back defensively, but now have all these great, shiny new toys offensively. And it's been quite the opposite, at least in terms of continuity and chemistry-wise. So it'll be very interesting to see how they do get that offense up the par or the defense, and it kind of takes a little bit of regression when the offense does finally catch up.
Neil Greenberg from from the Washington Post wrote a very interesting article about how impressive this win streak is for the Boston Celtics, even on some historical levels. And there's one caveat to this that I want to emphasize about how impressive the Boston Celtics are defensively so far in this streak. The Celtics are allowing a league low 97.5 points per 100% possessions, which at this rate, if they continue this type of trend, this would be considered as the 8th best defensive effort since 1979 and 1980. That's damn near 37 years, right? So let it not be said that one of the things that's really interesting in the era of offensively played basketball, the Celtics are figuring out a way to play that tough-minded defensive basketball that should scare teams in the Eastern Conference. Because, listen, we know the propensity of what happens when you don't have, the most dominant player in the game of basketball, if it's LeBron James in the Eastern Conference or a Kevin Durant in the Western Conference, or maybe even a Steph Curry, James Harden as such in that conference respectively. Any one of these teams in the Eastern Conference can be susceptible to bad runs, to offensive ruts, so if you will. And when you have a defense with the type of skill set that the Celtics bring about defensively, they can rest on their laurels knowing that they can make stops against the opposing team. And that should frighten teams that are in the Eastern Conference, because it's not as if we're not seeing the best of the Boston Celtics being played. This is a team that's just been newly formed that's already doing this kind of damage at the early outset of this season.
Well, I'll close it with this, if you will. There's another great article, because a lot of it has been written and talked about with this win streak. Ken Berger, he put out something, and I was just, I read it, and it was basically about Danny Ainge. And I'll just say this, I think Ainge has reached a level now where, as John has said too, he's above reproach. If he does something, we're all quick to kind of like, well, what the hell, and why do this, and what's taking so long in certain cases, blah, 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 blah. He knows what he's doing, man. And at least the early onset of this season, he's proved a lot of haters and doubters wrong for some of his moves in the summertime. And I think he's reached a level of kind of like Jerry West, if you will, and even the Spurs and R.C. Buford. If they're calling and inquiring about a guy, you may want to do a double take. You know what I mean? You may want to do a reassessment of that guy, or before you try to make a deal with Ainge, because he seems to be doing very good, at least in these last recent seasons, about his talent evaluation and what he's trying to bring to this roster to make that chemistry build.
Definitely. Just to give people a little nugget about how impressive the tandem is between Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, opponents are shooting 31.5% from three-point range. Impressive? Oh, I definitely say that it is, and it's one of the main reasons why the Boston Celtics are the hottest team in the NBA as we speak right now. All right, now coming up next here on The Drop, our coveted Who You Got. My man Shaw's got two very talented names lined up, and we cannot wait to put your cranium in a pinch throwing out these two names as we discuss who we would choose to start our franchise, our organization, our starting lineups with. I wonder how hard it will be for you to choose between the two as well, too. So stick around with us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee Warrenshaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week on The Drop, we have got a very interesting Who You Got. This is the first one that we're doing for the 2017-18 NBA season. And damn you, Shaw, for coming up with the two names that we have got to talk about on Who You Got. So if you are a Philadelphia 76er fan, you might not want to listen to this part of the segment. If you're anyone else in the NBA right now that is witnessing the greatness of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid combined together, then I'm sure you all will be trying to inject yourselves in the throes of this conversation. Because really the topic is, who would you pick to start your franchise, to start your team? Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid? Shaw, since you have weighed this very, very heavy mental NBA burden of questioning on our souls, I'm going to let you start this off and just let me go ahead and meditate on this a little bit.
Well, I think it's funny, and I want to give credit where credit's due, because I think I got the idea from somewhere on Instagram. I want to say it was Swish Factor or one of those accounts.
Damn you, Swish Factor. Anybody else? Because I'm going to damn them all. I'm damning them all. You name them, I'm damning them.
They have a lot of great, just kind of, pitting a team versus team, or a player versus player, or error versus error, that type of thing. And this is a situation, and usually in our Who You Got, we're doing like player comparisons, if you will, like a small forward or a wing and a wing. You know what I mean? A point guard and a point guard, that type of thing. Here we're talking about it simply from a franchise starting standpoint. Guys who is a center, a true center, if you will, in Joel Embiid, and a guy who is a point forward in Ben Simmons. And for me, when you look at the sum of the parts again for these two guys, you can't go wrong either way. It really just a matter of, okay, if all things being considered, right? Joel Embiid is a healthy basketball player. He has no issues. Ben Simmons is healthy, and he has no issues. Who has the best long-term outlook? And if you are starting a franchise, and this is something that maybe Philadelphia may at some point have to deal with in terms of, when their contracts and nations, come up. I know Embiid just signed his deal, but, there might be a point where it's like, hey, you know what? Simmons is here. Do they have enough money to keep him? If I was starting the franchise, I think I would still stick with a healthy, and that's the key there, a healthy Joel Embiid. Simply because of the offense and the defense. I know Simmons is giving you damn near a triple-double, and people are saying he's going to be potentially the next LeBron or whatever the case may be. But Embiid's just overall impact on our franchise. Again, I've used this analogy before when we've done Who You Got. He sells tickets. He's marketable. All the things that you want in your franchise superstar, and that's not knocking Ben Simmons in the least bit. But you take his offense, you take his defense, you take his marketability. I just can't see how you don't take Joel Embiid if you're trying to start a franchise today.
Yeah, this is, again, and even as you're speaking, I might need you to speak 5 more minutes more to still give me time to decide between who I want to select between Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid.
I was rambling, man.
Oh, is that what you were doing? Okay, good. Well, then let me go ahead and ramble a little bit on. Let me put it like this, Shaw. For the sake of us having this conversation, because I don't want it to be too much about Joel Embiid, because I really think you can't go wrong with Joel Embiid. I'm going to take Ben Simmons on this one. And the reason why I'm going to take Ben Simmons on this one is because at some point you begin to wonder whether or not, when we talk about cornerstone players, are they cornerstone players because what they do is they go out and they dominate a game? Do they dominate a team? Or do they go and dominate a league? And this is part of the reason why I think people try to make the comparisons of Ben Simmons to LeBron James. Is with Joel Embiid, and I'm not taking anything from him, with Joel Embiid, we saw that he's capable of giving you 22 and 10, and maybe to some degree, maybe 3, 4, 5 assists per game. But is that necessarily saying that he's dominating the league? Is that someone that is striking fear in the hearts of opposing basketball teams when he steps on that basketball court? Shaquille O'Neal-esque, if you will, right? The reason why I lean more to Ben Simmons is because I think Ben Simmons facilitates the type of dominance Joel Embiid can put himself in, but I don't know if he can do it on his own. Whereas with Ben Simmons, I think it just becomes a question of how aggressive can Ben Simmons be? And the last time that we asked a question about that in a player is when we asked that about LeBron James. Now, we'll never be able to tell if whether or not Ben Simmons is capable of doing that because his pass-first mentality is now facilitated to a much better lineup than we ever saw LeBron James have in his early years as a Cleveland Cavalier. So we're never going to see Ben Simmons just go out and dominate against a team unless something happens to a Joel Embiid, something happens to a Robert Covington, something happens to even JJ Redick, for Christ's sake, is on this basketball team. This 76ers team is a team that's built to improve and play and be good. and you can surround yourself around young guys like a Ben Simmons who can move up on the echelon in conversations. But I'm just stripping it all down and just looking at the dynamic play that Ben Simmons brings to the table, and already almost averaging a triple-double while having a dominant player like a Joel Embiid puts the spotlight more on a guy like Ben Simmons, in my opinion, simply because if he ever had that aggressive gene in him, he will undoubtedly be the person that you fear every single time the Philadelphia 76ers walk into the opposing team's arenas.
Well, I'll agree with you in one aspect where I think Simmons might still, even in general, have the most upside, at least offensively, and maybe even some room to grow defensively. Because we know he doesn't have a jump shot at this stage of his career. He really is doing it almost Giannis style, where he's consistently just attacking the paint. He's always in the lane, and he's making great decisions once he's in there. And again, I think he can even become a better finisher. So offensively, he still has more room to grow. Where I think when Bede, I think offensively he might be closer to his peak overall. You might want to see, okay, he can maybe improve his shooting touch a little bit, maybe improve his back to the basket game even a little bit as well too. But like I said, you can't go wrong in this situation. Why I still lead towards Embiid though, I think it's because of the overall defense and his ability to rim protect. And I think he's even still a decent passer out of the double team, and that's an area where I think he's going to continue to grow and get better at, as the seasons go on. But as a guy, not shooting the three ball all that well this year, as opposed to last year, we included him in our big man segment, if you will, of stretch fives. And I think that's because he has Simmons now, where Simmons is penetrating and controlling the basketball a lot more. So he's not even taking as many threes as he was last year. But I think Embiid is going to be, I think what we saw last year is probably a little bit closer to what he can be. So as a guy who can stretch the floor at that five position, as a guy who can post up, as a guy who can hit, pick, and pop even as well too. And again, I think he has the ability to get his passing a little bit better. So for me, it's gonna be Joel Embiid, but it's not a slam dunk. You know what I mean? This is more of a finger roll layup, because if you told me Ben Simmons, I wouldn't be mad either way if I was a GM and had to make that choice.
If you had to separate these two guys, Shaw, from their respective teams, how dominant could you see Ben Simmons being as a player, given that rawness that you talked about with him in comparison to a Giannis Antetokounmpo? Like, how long do you see where his maturation process, is how I like to call it, would it actually shine through? Do you think that in other words, would he springboard at a faster rate than a Giannis Antetokounmpo, or would he just be basically right there?
No, I think he's going to have a faster trajectory. I think Giannis, a lot of people were unsure, and he was still more of a project. He was very raw coming in. Simmons, for lack of a better phrase, is a little bit more polished. And I mean, let's really be honest. Giannis wasn't averaging a near triple-double in his rookie season. And that circumstance and a lot of different things as well too. But Simmons having, being 21, again, the ripe old age, if you will, but even seeing the game a year kind of on the bench and kind of just understanding it and seeing it from that aspect, I think that's all that has helped him. And Brett Brown has done a great job in his coaching and development of that young man as well too. I think you're going to see Simmons take extreme leaps next year, again, assuming health, and then maybe even the year after that, where he's going to be potentially be knocking down the door alongside his teammate Joel Embiid for MVP considerations. The Philadelphia 76ers continue to build the rest of that roster and put great players alongside of those two. This team is really scary to me when you think about it. And this is not to say they still have Marco Fultz in the wings. That guy hasn't played, really much of anything this year. And he's still potentially going to develop into a very, very good basketball player as well too. Again, the fact that both of these guys and who you got are on the same roster is amazing to me. But again, I still take the edge towards Embiid. But again, Simmons is going to be, and already is, a monster of epic proportions.
Who gets that MVP first, Simmons or Embiid?
Wow, man. Yeah, let's take it.
Listen, I'm blaming you for coming up with this one on who you got, so I'm gonna make it as difficult as possible until we end this segment. My questioning for you. So yeah, you're gonna pony up. Answer that one for me, sir.
All right, well, and I'm gonna throw it right back as well too. Volleyball, that thing. But in our preseason conversations when we talked about Philadelphia, you asked me very poignantly again who was most important to this team's success, and I told you, well, Embiid's health is the most important thing. So assuming Embiid's health, I was more concerned about Ben Simmons now kind of being that guy who needed to be, who we thought he could be. But I don't think we saw 18, 9, and 8. I don't think anybody saw 18, 9, and 8 and almost 2 steals a game, shooting 52% from the floor through the first 15 games. I don't think we saw that coming. And my factor, if you will, is like, again, Embiid's health, but Simmons had to be the guy that was going to make them take that next level and that next step towards being more than just a bottom feeder in the Eastern Conference and being a team that could potentially challenge for a playoff spot. If you ask me who I think would win the MVP first, I think it could be Simmons simply because he puts up those numbers across the board. And if he's going to challenge, the ilks of the Russell Westbrooks, if you will, and average a triple-double at some stage of his career, like legitimately where he's maybe a 22, 11, and 10 or something like that, I think that could very much garner him MVP consideration over Embiid, who could average 28 and 13. But again, you're looking at a triple-double. I think that's what kind of gets people's attention a little bit more.
Listen, if we haven't been given this MVP award to an Anthony Davis, to a DeMarcus Cousins, and take nothing from it, part of the reason why for Anthony Davis is health. Part of the reason why for DeMarcus Cousins is because none of his teams win. How long do you think we're going to continue to keep waiting in bated breath before we give it to a big, right? So ultimately, for guys like Joel Embiid, who's playing with the Philadelphia 76ers team that now has to contend in an Atlantic division where you've got the Toronto Raptors and the Boston Celtics, if you're not getting this kind of dynamic play from a guy like Ben Simmons, it'll be hard pressed, and unless you're dominating the game, as I was saying from earlier when we had this conversation, that Joel Embiid is not going to be in that position to get that MVP award. It doesn't mean he's not MVP worthy. It's just that now that you have this kind of play from a guy right next to you in Ben Simmons, I'm almost apt to think that he's likely to get that MVP award just simply because he's going to do so many other things and make things so much easier for Joel Embiid. But to your point, Shaw, let it not be overlooked that if we actually broke the numbers down, a very good case can be made about the utter dominance to Joel Embiid, the wound that he can inflict against opposing teams, sheer by not just his presence, but his overall dynamic way that he plays that basketball game. And to your point, that's exactly why the Philadelphia 76ers are currently one of the most dangerous teams in the Eastern Conference as we speak. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Adam Silver, Michelle Roberts are working together in conjunction with the NCAA about the possibility of a one-and-done rule. Is it about time that this starts happening, sir?
Well, yeah, I think for at least from the league standpoint, it's something that's been a point of contention for Adam Silver. So the fact that he's getting some support from the Players Association, Michelle Roberts, to approach the NCAA on this issue, I think is definitely speaking to his stick-to-itiveness and his passion for this specific issue. So I think the NCAA will be willing partners as the NBA understands that they want to make sure that they have guys and putting guys in the best position when they enter the league.
All right, Al, the injury report, as we sort of like to call it. Markelle Fultz, Derrick Rose, both out 2 to 3 weeks. They'll have to be evaluated in that time span as well, too. So there's possibly some more additional games. And then Mike Conley for the Memphis Grizzlies out indefinitely. All impact scenarios and situations. Who is going to feel it more, though?
Well, I think it's the Grizzlies, hands down, because I think the Cavs and the 76ers, they've been playing without those guys respectively for a good part of the year now already. Memphis is just not prepared and not built really to sustain another Mike Conley injury, especially with some of the roster turnover that they've had. Luckily, it's hard for them. Tyreek Evans is playing great basketball and has been healthy to date. So I think he'll assume some more duties, but Mario Chalmers will enter the starting lineup for the Memphis Grizzlies. But for me, just then the fact that you don't know how long Conley is going to be out is very, very concerning because they don't have a whole lot of depth on that roster.
All right, Shaw. And finally, out in Philadelphia, we've been talking Sixers, man, especially in our last segment, Who You Got. I can't wait for us to do a Who You Got segment for our man Robert Covington, because the 76ers says we got him. 4 years, $62 million. I mean, listen, man, my man getting paid lovely, but all well deserved when we talk about Robert Covington.
Yeah, you talk about a guy who came in the Hinkie days, right, and was a D-leaguer at the time, now G-League. And somebody who a lot of people, who is this guy? I remember looking and saying, who is this Robert Covington guy running around on the basketball court when I'm checking the box scores? And this is a gentleman who's really developed his game as a 3-and-D guy. very confident in shooting that 3 ball. And this is a great deal for them to keep that young core together. Again, he's a starter in this league, not just a rotation player. He's an elite player and does a lot for them on both sides of the basketball. And I think the great thing about this deal, it allows them some great flexibility. In the middle part there, I think years 2 and 3, his contract goes down to between like 12 and 11 million. It spikes in the first year, like I think roughly at 18. But between years 2 and 3, it allows the 76ers, when Simmons' contract is up, allows them some flexibility to sign him and keep everything under the cap. So they're doing some great roster management and cap management with the deal of Robert Covington.
All right. Well, congratulations to our man, Robert Covington. Well deserved. I remember I kept passing up this guy on my FanDuel and DraftKings lineups, and I paid the price then. And of course, I will be paying the price now if we're not talking about Robert Covington as being one of the premier 3-and-D guys, to your point, y'all. Excellent show all together. Big time getting our man John Corrales on board to help talk about the Boston Celtics and the impressive, not just the impressive win streak, but how impressive this basketball team is, especially after losing their premier free agency pickup in this offseason. To have them 13 games above 500 already at the beginning point of this season, things are definitely looking up for the people out there in Gang Green.
Absolutely, man. Again, it was great to have a guy like that who's just so passionate come on the show. Discuss his insights from the Celtics, as we've alluded to many times. We're Celtics fans as well, but we want to give you a unbiased opinion from our side, if you will, to somebody who's really close to the team and understand what's going on. So it's great to have him come on. And as always, just a great show in terms of getting the who you got, man. I'm still scratching my head. I'm kind of waffling a little bit here right now. And you talk about Robert Covington, missing out on your FanDuel, man. In my draft, I took Yusuf Nurkic over Ben Simmons, and I sat there and I was like, I need a big. I don't know what Simmons is going to be. I'm kicking myself in my ass all day long with that pick, man. So again, we win some, we lose some, but the Boston Celtics continue to win 15 games straight as we close this show out, and we'll see what happens for the rest of the way, brother.
Definitely. So once again, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us. Again, big shout out to our man, John Corrales. Once again, if you guys want to catch one of the premier websites discussing Boston Celtics basketball, check out Locked On Celtics. And be sure to check out my man, John Corrales, on Twitter at RedsArmy_John. For the baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.